Hi everyone, so in the last video you learned that you're going to find your basis of classification and only talk about what you said you're going to talk about. Now let's move on to the next few steps of how to make claims. The next step that you want to do is list a whole bunch of reasons after you find your basis of classification that your thesis statement might be true. So list everything you can think of. You might come up with like 10 or even 20 sentences as to why your thesis might be true. So if I say year-round schooling has positive benefits, then I might talk about test scores, I might talk about socialization skills, I might talk about the psychological happiness of students, I might talk about teachers' happiness and well-being, I might talk about money and how it saves money for the district. I might talk about how it saves money for families. I could go on and on. So if I make a list of 20 different sentences for reasons that I'm guessing at, I don't know these are true, reasons that my thesis statement might be true, I can't talk about everything I listed. I'm just listing it right now. But when I write my paper, I'm not writing a book here. I'm just writing a 12 to 20 page research paper. So I have to pick the best reasons, the reasons that grab my attention the most, but also I think are the best reasons that prove my thesis true. So not only do these 20 sentences or 10 sentences you make live within your basis of classification, they're restricted based on what you said your thesis would be, but you, from that extensive list, only choose 3 or 4 or even 2. Just choose a few of them, the best reasons why your thesis might be true. So then after you do that, you want to make sure that they're argumentative. So a thesis sentence is one sentence. We know it's argumentative. It'll split a room full of rational people. Let's say you have a room of 100 rational people and you called out your thesis statement. The more argumentative it is, the more evenly it would be divided. For instance, there should be copper mining in the Boundary Waters canoe area. Well, that's going to pretty evenly divide a room full of rational people, some for the economy and some for nature. If I were to call out dogs are better companions for humans than cats, that might also pretty evenly divide a room. If I were to call out year-round schooling is better for students, that's probably going to pretty evenly divide a room. If I were to call out there's a sun in the sky and the earth revolves around the sun, nobody is going to go to the no section of that. If it's a rational room full of people, nobody's going to do that. If there's some irrational people that snuck in, that think that everything's a conspiracy, they're probably going to run to no side or whatever. Or they're like time traveling from the 1500s, they don't know any better. So when you have a debatable sentence, it evenly divides a room full of rational people. Now, you might not know if it will evenly divide a room full of rational people, and in that case, you could just Google part of the sentence or part of your statement and see if there's a debate on both sides, if you're finding articles on both sides or sources on both sides. So you have this extensive list of all the reasons your thesis might be true that lives within the restrictions you made. Then from that extensive list, you're picking 2 or 3 or 4 sentences that could prove your thesis true. Next, you're checking to make sure if you called out each claim in a room full of rational people, it would somewhat divide a room. Maybe 75-25, 50-50 is the best. That means it's the most debatable. You're making sure it divides that room. Then after that, you have a bunch of other things to remember. Now, when you get really good at thesis statements and you get really good at claims, you're going to start to be able just to do them off the top of your head. But right now, you can't. We're just practicing. So the next thing you have to look at for each of your individual claims are they too narrow? As you saw in the last example of baseball, his first and second claim were basically the same thing. They were so close together that the sentences were arguing the same thing, that young people can't pay attention to the slow nature of the game. That was too close. That means they're too narrow. They're too focused in, they're touching each other, they're basically the same one. Check for that. Look at the sentences. Are they basically saying the same thing? If they are, throw one of them out or combine them and then grab another one from your list. Now, the next thing you want to make sure, is it too broad? Is it too broad? What I mean by that is, does the claim, so I talked about year-round schooling, and then one of the examples I gave for one of my claim sentences could be something along the lines of year-round schooling is psychologically positive for students. Now, to examine the psychological role that schooling plays in a student's life would take a very, very long time. That would be another book. So maybe I wouldn't want to talk about that. I want to narrow it in even further. And I would say something along the lines of year-round schooling allows for students to have consistency in their life, a foundation for happy children. So see how I narrowed it in there, talking just about consistency instead of all the positive psychological benefits of year-round schooling? You want to make sure that your individual claims are not too broad. Here's how you do this. Think about proving them true. Can you prove them true in 3 to 4 pages? Absolutely, unequivocally, have enough evidence in there that shows your side of the argument. If it takes longer than 3 to 4 pages, if you imagine it taking 20 pages, then maybe your claim is too big and you need to make something else in it to narrow it down. For me, I added consistency to narrow down that one I just made up, but for you, you might add something else to narrow it down. So now you've just made sure it was argumentative, checked if it was too broad, and now you've checked if it was too narrow. These are all the steps that you take when you're making good claim sentences. Claim sentences are sub-arguments that prove your thesis true. Now this is a very simple one, this next one, but a lot of times we miss it. Make sure it's written as a statement and not as a question, right? Just like a thesis statement, these are statements and you don't put question marks after them. They're written like statements. Now the next one is make sure they don't shoot off topic. So it should not talk about anything outside of what you said it would talk about. The reason for number 9 here that I put this down, even though you supposedly figured out your restrictions and made sentences that live within those restrictions, the reason I put it far down here is I like when students pause, they do all this other stuff and they go back to them. You'll see things that you didn't see originally when you made them a moment ago. You paused a little bit and now you're going to make sure and read them and really make sure they're living within your restrictions that you found. They're not going outside the boundaries. So the next one is let's just double check. Now some of these are repetitive. We've already gone over them, but they're really important ones if they're repetitive. Let's make sure they follow all the same rules of a good thesis statement. It's interesting to you. Each of your claims should be interesting to you. They're argumentative. They're specific and manageable. So not too narrow, not too broad. Goldilocks. It's a claim of fact. Now, they should not have a should or ought in them. We can prove it true with facts that have happened in the past, just like we've talked about over and over. Your claims should live in that realm too. They have an audience. I'm sure all of them do. Your thesis statements, if you follow the rule with your thesis, all your claims then will have an audience as well. And then it's not simply a matter of personal taste or belief. I skipped F because I don't think any of your thesis statements fall in that category. So it's not simply a matter of personal taste or belief. In other words, it's not just your opinion that you can't prove true. Or preference, it's not a preference. We already talked about too big. It's not too big and it's not too small. Okay, so now after you do this, you have a pretty good sentences. You should right now have pretty good sentences going on. So now I want you to research them a little bit. Make sure that you are on target, that somebody's talking about this somewhere in the world. If you Google your sentence or Google part of it, someone should be talking about this. If they're not, you might have a hard road of researching ahead of you. So just take a moment and check out your claim. Make sure you can find the S part of the CSE section, supports for it, as you go forward. Then, after you do all these things, then you would submit your claim sentences to me for this lab. Now, that seems pretty simple, right? You're only writing 3 sentences. This will be the hardest 3 sentences you write this semester because they have to follow all of these rules simultaneously, and that's so difficult to keep in your head all at once. To end the video, I'm going to put up on the screen here, which you can pause, another student example. And you can see my responses to that student example right here. This was a great paper. I love this paper. We'll be using this example throughout the semester, but for right now, I urge you to pause it, see what I wrote about the pink video games claims and why I might have wrote that. So when we start doing examples like this, you can see the pitfalls.